everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and I like to talk about books, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite romance books. So I thought this would be a fun idea to do since it is Valentine's Day weekend, just to chat about some romance that I really enjoyed. As you've seen by the title, I am not a romance reader by nature. I definitely have had a phase in my life where I read a ton of romance, lots of new adult romance. I've read like everything Colleen Hoover has written. I read a lot of Abby Glines. It was a weird time in my life. But in terms of like the hottest romances nowadays, I don't really read them. Like, haven't read The Kiss Quotient or The Hating Game or really any of those big ones that you're used to seeing on those lists of like the best romances, or really the ones that like booktubers are reading. I just haven't read a ton of those. I read some of them, but not a ton. So I just thought it would be fun to share my favorite romance books since I'm not huge on romance. So if you are also interested in romance, but not like fully into the whole like style of romance that's really popular right now, then maybe you can find some books that you'd be interested in. The first two books I'll start with are pretty conventional romances. They're ones you'll see on that list. So I'll just go ahead and start with those, and we probably don't have to talk about them too long because I'm sure you've heard about them. The first one of those is The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I read this book last summer and I just had so much freaking fun with it. It was like unbelievable. So this book starts with a wedding gone wrong. The people getting married are not our main characters though. Our main characters are the sister of the bride and the best man of the groom, and they're not necessarily enemies, but they don't have a great friendship with each other. Basically, she thinks he hates her and he kind of acts like he hates her. There's like tension there. Essentially what happens is during the wedding, everyone gets food poisoning except for those two because they didn't eat the food. And so the bride and groom can no longer go on their honeymoon. They're not going to be able to stomach it, no pun intended. And so they send off Olive and Ethan to go on their honeymoon for them. So these two characters who don't really get along end up having to go on this beautiful resort vacation together. And of course, then they fall in love. Things get pretty steamy. There's a massage scene that I was just sitting on the edge of my seat for. Definitely think this one was a ton of fun. I know this one has been really hyped, but I actually really enjoyed this one. I've read several other books from Christina Lauren, and this is the only one that has really resonated with me. All the other ones have fallen flat for me. So if you're interested in Christina Lauren, I think this is the best. And then the second book I have is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. I talk about this book quite a bit because it is just one of my favorite books of all time. It's like a warm, fuzzy hug to me. It's my cozy nostalgia read, and I just love it so much. So this is also a enemies to lovers type story where there are these two characters. One is the son of the president and one is a prince over in England. They end up having to do a sort of like fake friendship situation after this like PR thing they get photographed in this like fight thing kind of basically. And so as a PR stunt, their agents and people around them like want them to fake a friendship so that it seems like relations are good between the US and England. They're not so hype about that at first, but then they do form a great friendship, and the exterior friends that they have that all come together as well. Like there's just a whole group of them that end up as friends, and their relationship in here is so adorable and so cute and sweet and wholesome and wonderful. And I love the portrait of America in this book, and it is just amazing. I want to reread it literally right now. Just sitting here holding it makes me want to reread it. So if you're looking for something just warm and fuzzy, would definitely recommend this one. There's also some really cute like emails and text chats that go between them, so if that's something you like, would also recommend that. I don't usually love that, but the banter is just really good in this one, and I had a ton of fun with it. The other book I have that isn't necessarily like a conventional top romance pick, but it is pretty well known and talked about a lot, is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this story follows Evelyn Hugo, who was a famous actress in the 1950s to the 80s, and she has been very secretive about her life and her past. She's had 7 husbands. She doesn't like to talk about her reasoning for her lifestyle choices a lot, and now that her career is coming to an end, she's very old now, she has agreed to do like an exclusive interview with this one journalist where she will be telling her life story, explaining why she made certain choices in her life, giving background, behind the scenes details, and revealing who her one true love was. Meanwhile, you also have the mystery going on of why Evelyn Hugo picked this particular journalist to tell her story after all of this time. So that also keeps a really interesting amount of intrigue in the book. So if you're someone who's looking for something that isn't purely romance but also has some like literary backing to it, maybe a little mystery that you're trying to follow at the the same time. This is really rich with a lot of that stuff, so this is probably a good place to go. But oh my gosh, it's really beautiful. It is a really beautiful story. I love reading about Evelyn's connections with all the people that she has in this book and how she grew throughout her life, and it's just really, really wonderful. Definitely a tearjerker. I don't know if you would consider it a spoiler if I told you a certain thing about this book, so I'll withhold it, but I particularly love who her one true love is and how that manifests throughout the story and how you find out who that is, and also just the friendship she develops with some people along the way. So definitely a really good one. Does live up to all the hype that you've seen and is less of just like a fluffy romance and more of like an emotional moving story. Speaking of emotional moving stories, let's go ahead and talk about A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, because this is a relationship that will be living in my head rent-free for the rest of my life. This book is truly incredible. I have an entire reading vlog dedicated to this book where I talk about my experience reading it, how I felt, what I was thinking, and then have a pretty lengthy discussion at the end of that video talking about a lot of frequently asked questions like, is this book actually as good as people say it is? Is it worth reading? Is it too much of trauma porn or torture porn? So if you're hesitant about picking this book up, I definitely would recommend checking out that video first and some of those discussion topics where I talk about who this might be a good read for and who this might not be a good read for and how it could be helpful or harmful to certain people. Definitely would recommend checking that out first. I do like to give that disclaimer with this book that it is not for everyone. It is very emotional. There are a lot of content and trigger warnings. It is very intense and it can be harmful to some readers. So take this with a grain of salt. This is just my personal experience with this book. I adored this relationship. This is one of my favorite relationships I've ever read. This book mainly follows a friend group of 4 guys living in New York City. It follows their friendship right after college all the way through like the rest of their lives pretty much. The main character you're focusing on, Jude, has had an extremely traumatic and harrowing past and experiences a lot of traumatic things still in his adult life that he tries to cope with. And the relationship that Jude develops in this story, not only with just his friends and like the friend style of relationship, but also the romance that he develops in this book with another character, I won't give a spoiler, is just the most freaking beautiful love story ever, and it just hurts my heart so much to think about certain things that happen in this book. I'm trying to not give any spoilers away, but this is one of the most well-written books I've ever read in terms of characterization. I think characterization is super important for romances. That is something that really gets me intrigued in a romance, is when characters feel really distinct and really realized and like actual people, and I can understand their motives and interests and conflicts they have between one another rather than them just being like caricatures of people that you sometimes see in like these fluffy romance stories. This is like a very, very real feeling story. It heavily affected me. It's heavily affected a lot of people and I just really love it. Definitely would not categorize this book as a romance book in particular. That's why it's kind of a weird one to have on this list, but it is a book that has a romance. That is one of my favorite romances that I've read. Next, we'll talk about a really light one just to lighten the mood up a little bit, and that is Fangs by Sarah Andersen. This is a little comic graphic novel book that, first of all, I just adore. I think it is one of the most beautifully constructed books that I have ever seen in my life or that I own. I just think it's gorgeous, but it's also just a really fun little cute time. So this is a series of little comics and it's not connected in a particular storyline. It's more of just like comics you could see in the newspaper going back to back to back, but it is about a female vampire dating a male werewolf and just showing little glimpses of their relationship, and it's super, super cute. It's super fun. I love to keep this book sitting out just to look at the cute little cheesy jokes in there when you just need a little smile or a laugh. It is just adorable. I love this vampire and werewolf pairing so much. I wish I could read a whole book about them or watch a whole movie about them or know them as my friends. It's just amazing. Really fun, cute time. If you like dark humor, you're gonna like this. The next book I have to talk about doesn't have a ton of romance in it. It is kind of part of the plot and people mention this book and the romance in it quite a bit, but it's not like at the forefront of the story. And that is The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. As I'm sure you probably know, this is one of my favorite books of all time. I love this book so much. It's just really adorable, a whimsical, fun, heartfelt read. Like I said, romance isn't the main point of this this story. This follows a character named Linus who works for this department that is in charge of monitoring magical youth in the world, and he has to go to this orphanage where there are all of these magical kids staying and being raised by this guy Arthur, and that is the house in the Cerulean Sea where they keep all these. They're supposedly the most dangerous magical youth in the land, and so they have reserved them to this part of this island, like way outcast from society. Essentially, the story follows Linus coming in pretty prejudiced about this group of kids and then warming up to them, getting to understand them, seeing how society treats them, also learning some things about himself along the way. It's a pretty predictable story. It's kind of meant to be. It's just like a nice, heartfelt, warm, loving story. But also along the way, Linus also falls in love with the caretaker of these children, Arthur, and they develop a relationship by the end of the story. And this is just another book where, yes, I love the romance between them, but I also just love the relationships that are developed between all of the characters in this book. I think that really heightens that warm, fuzzy romance feeling for me, is when everyone's just so loving and they build this community and there's friendship and people caring for each other along with a romantic relationship. That's like my favorite type of story to read. So it's just really sweet watching how these kids shape Linus and how Linus shapes these kids. And it's also just fun because they're all magical, and so there's some like quirky characters. They are just really, really fun and funny and whimsical and cute, and I just really, really love this one. So if you're looking for more of a heartfelt book where romance isn't going to be a huge part of the plot, but it will come along eventually, then I would recommend this one. But I don't usually recommend this as a romance book. I just couldn't not talk about this book because I love it so much. The next book I have to talk about is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is sort of a polarizing book. I've seen some people really not like this or say like V.E. Schwab doesn't know how to write romance. I think a lot of the people that say that have read a lot of other books from V.E. Schwab, and so they probably have more to go off of, and maybe it's not as great in her other books, or maybe they're expecting a different style of romance. Anyways, this was the first book by V.E. Schwab that I read, and I love it a lot. Definitely not a perfect book. It is super slow paced. There are things I wish were different. I think it had some missed opportunities. Definitely is a very Eurocentric book and could have included more diversity and been interesting. But overall, I still really love it. I love the center and the heart of this novel, and while I think it could have been better, I just really do love the romance that is developed in this book. So this follows our main character, Addie LaRue, who was born in 1700s in France. She ends up making a bargain with a devil-like dark creature, basically, where she ends up getting to live forever, but no one will ever remember who she is. So literally she like can be talking to someone, and then if they turn around and then turn back around, they don't remember ever speaking to her. She loses connections with all of her family, all of her friends, and you follow her for 300 years of her life and see how difficult that was for her, until eventually, in the more present day setting in New York City, one man remembers her, and then you watch their relationship develop and you come to understand how he can remember her and why, and you learn a lot about him, and it's just really, really beautiful. This is another book that's just like really well written. The characters are really well done. They're really well developed. You spend a lot of time with Addie LaRue to really understand her, and it's very much like in her head. So if you don't really like claustrophobic novels, you might not like that. It's also a little repetitive and slow paced. Like I said, this book really kicks off at like the halfway point is when it starts getting really, really good. A lot of people don't want to wait that long to get something good, but I really think this was worth it. It had a really good atmosphere. The characters were really well developed. The romance was beautiful. There's also like some romantic temptation that happen with the devil dark force thing that Addie LaRue deals with, and yeah, I won't give any spoilers, but wow, I just really like this book for everything that happened in it. I think it was really well written and I just enjoyed it a lot. So if you're looking for something kind of historical, got a great atmosphere, you're really invested in coming to understand characters, then I think you would really like this one. And then the last book I have to talk about is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I feel like a lot of people wouldn't talk about this as a romance or classify it as a romance, but I think this is top tier, like the most beautiful love story I have ever read. And I feel that throughout the entire book, especially the latter half of the book. When I was reading this book and as I finished this, I was just so blown away by the overarching love story in it. It was just so beautiful, and I feel like nobody really talks about that aspect of it. I think they just talk about like the fantastical atmosphere and the environment that Erin Morgenstern creates in this, but I just really loved the connection between our two main characters. So this is a story that follows these two characters who are basically pitted against each other in this magical competition that they don't really fully understand. They didn't choose this life. It was just kind of chosen for them. And they both participate in this night circus. It's a traveling circus that comes out at night. They both like create all these really cool spectacles and these magic things going on. And oh my gosh, there's just like also a scene in a cafe and then a rain scene with an umbrella. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And that scene in particular just speaks to me so deeply. Like, I don't know why, I just love that scene so much. And every time I think about this book, I think about that scene and it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy and happy inside. This is definitely a very enchanting book. It is very atmospheric. It is slow moving and lyrical and less focused on like super exciting plot actions happening. So if that's not your vibe, you're not gonna like this book. But like what I've talked about in a lot of the other books I've recommended, really great character development, really great atmosphere, really great relationships between a lot of the characters, a lot of these people who are involved in the circus. You've got some really cool, fun little characters on the side that are enjoyable to watch too. But yeah, this is just like top tier, one of my favorite romances of all time. I think it's just so beautiful, and it might not be conventional, but this is what I think of when I think of love. So that is it. Those are all of my favorite romances from a non-romance reader. Let me know if any of these books are also some of your favorite romance books, or let me know if you disagree with some of my non-conventional ones, because I could definitely see that too. But I hope most of you at least understand out there the types of romance that I really enjoy that aren't necessarily these like really fluffy reads. I still like those sometimes too. Like, I'm not immune to those, no shade to those, but my favorite romance stories are the ones that are just like really deep and like great character writing, really atmospheric, and about more than just the relationship. Those tend to be what really stand out to me. Also, let me know what your favorite non-conventional romance book is, because I would love to read more of these. It's just like my favorite thing when I'm not expecting there to be a really great romance in a book. I just think it's something else, and then there's just like a really beautiful love story in it. So if you have any recommendations for me, definitely let me know below, because I want to check out more of those as well. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!